The game industry has a very unique perspective on remakes, as does its fan base in general. Unlike movies, shot-for-shot remakes, which mostly just contain the original plot, but with some extra crap thrown in there, better visuals, aren't really that unusual in the game industry. Film generally doesn't do this. There are exceptions, the Psycho remake probably being the most obvious example. Thing is, let me just tell you about Psycho, because I've seen Psycho, and to me it probably doesn't hold up, or at least not as intended. I didn't find it particularly scary. There are a couple of moments where certain effects to me looked very fake. I mean, I'm a guy who was watching like The Great Ecstasy of Robert Carmichael at 16, so to me it wasn't like this freaking horrific, holy fuck, what am I watching thing. It actually felt very tame. Thing is, I respect the simple fact that Psycho is still a movie people watch and want to see, and the remake has kind of been, left at the wayside. It's not something people actually seem to care that much about. People just dismiss it because, well, it's the same movie, but, it's more modern. It's the same shot, same script, but it's more modern. The game industry doesn't seem to have that. There are numerous examples from the recent Demon's Souls remake, to the Shadow of the Colossus remake, to the Yakuza Kiwami remakes, to Abe New and Tasty. In fact, as someone who's a massive fan of Abe's Exodus and would put it in my top 10 favourite games of all time easily, I gotta say, one of the things I respect the most about the new game Soulstorm is that rather than a remake, it's a full-on reboot which ignores the plot of Exodus, takes a couple of ideas from it and does something completely different. And I haven't played that game because, bluntly, I'd rather, if I'm going to spend 40 quid, have a physical copy. But I'll probably give in to temptation and buy it anyway. I mean, buying it later is just going to ensure there's less bugs. It's just an interesting thing. I'm pretty sure half the reason people scream for a Red Dead Redemption remake is because you cannot play that game if you've got a PS4 or a PC. If you've got an Xbox One, you're fine. I don't have an Xbox One, but hey, if you've got one, that game in its original glory is there. It's weird I have to respect Microsoft for this thing, but it's interesting to know that you can both buy the original Conker's Bad Fur Day and the remake with way borderline CG movie quality visuals in place. But, if you want to go back to that old N64 game, that's fine. It's sort of interesting to think about the anger over the Final Fantasy VII remake, because there are a bunch of problems I have with that game, but none of them come down to the fact that it isn't just the original Final Fantasy VII with better graphics. If anything, my biggest issue with it was that it couldn't resist feeling like an episode. They could have easily trimmed that plot down and made it actually feel like a self-contained story, which left room for a sequel, but instead they shoved in tons of references to other characters who don't appear and aren't important to the core story to let you know, come on guys, get hyped, we're probably doing prequels, we're probably doing sequels, we're probably doing spin-offs, play the mobile game, we've probably got lore in there for you to pick the fuck up. Which, to me, was like their worst, most shitty decision they made. It's just an interesting attitude this industry sort of has. And, mad as people are about The Last of Us getting remade in 7 years, it's not really like it's the most extreme example. Metal Gear Solid got remade like barely 5 or 6 years after it originally came out. And people hated the fact that the director had changed how all the cutscenes were shot, but in a lot of ways that was the most interesting and the thing which most honestly justified its existence. Everything else was just the most lousy example of sticking more modern stuff on top of something where it didn't really fit. You had mechanics from Metal Gear Solid 2 butting up against stage designs from Metal Gear Solid 1. The Kiwami Yakuza games are another great example of this kind of batshit philosophy, where you have where you have a ton of extras, most of which just water down that original feel and do their best to make it feel, not just in terms of gameplay, but in terms of story, like the newer titles. Which feels weird because you have a character who can jump from acting like he did in that classic game to acting like the more light-hearted version he was when he hit his mid-40s. Or, in other cases, the goofier version from his 20s, rather than that character you had from those first two titles. Mix that in with a heavy focus on additional content and you have a story which feels way more padded out. Look, I like the Nishiki shit, that stuff is great, but I'll happily say that I don't feel a need to replay Kiwami 1 again because of how overstuffed they made that game. Ultimately, I just think the remake obsession is an unhealthy thing. The simple fact that people, despite having tons of ways to play the original Final Fantasy VII, at least with Red Dead, you can kind of justify it as in, hey, you need to buy what? You need to have an Xbox One. Hey, it's just a weird attitude where people genuinely cannot. The best excuse for wanting a remake is honestly just the fact that you cannot play that original game. And the fact that even when you can, people still bitch endlessly if they don't get a perfect version of that original game that's exactly the same with better visuals. Do you know how fucking stupid some of Final Fantasy VII would look in modern visuals? That's what you're asking for. Now shut the fuck up and play the original.